Welcome to the Nonprofit Coach and Everything DAF podcast, the show that unites leading voices in philanthropy, finance, and nonprofit strategy to help donors, their advisors, and the charities they support thrive. Your host today is Ted Hart, one of the foremost nonprofit thought leaders and the author of the DAF Revolution, making a difference in our modern world. Each episode features top experts sharing insider tips and real-world strategies in a lively conversational style, whether you're seasoned in the sector or just starting out. Ted lectures around the world, and now he's here for you. Here's Ted Hart.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Nonprofit Coach and Everything DAF. I'm your host, Ted Hart, and today I'm joined by someone who every day sits at the forefront of technology-driven evolution of donor-advised funds. Matt Nash is the executive director of Blackbaud Giving Fund, a donor-advised fund that connects nonprofits to generous donors through workplace giving and peer-to-peer fundraising. For more than a decade, Matt has worked to help nonprofits understand and engage with DAF donors, especially in the fast-evolving digital space. Matt, welcome here to the Nonprofit Coach.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, Ted. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. Thank you. Let's jump right in. You lead a very important donor-advised fund that's deeply integrated with technology. Can you help my audience learn a little bit more about Blackbaud Giving Fund that serves as a DAF sponsor?
Yeah, sure. So what we are is connected to two components of Blackbaud. We're a 501c3 donor-advised fund sponsor. So we aren't part of their organization, but we're very tightly connected to it. And one of them is to support the workplace giving programs, where there's hundreds of clients, corporate clients out there whose employees have a chance to go online and choose a charity that they can either volunteer for or give to. And when those funds are donated from the employees, then often the company will match those donations, and those funds come into the Blackbaud Giving Fund. And because we're a donor advised fund, we act on the advisement of the employees, and we send them out to the charities all over the world.
That's terrific.
The other area that we focus on is on peer-to-peer fundraising. And in that area, when people go onto a just giving platform, which is part of Blackbaud, to create a campaign to raise money for a charity, we are the donor advised fund that sends the funds out, gathers them together from all of the peers that are giving for that particular campaign, and then supporting that charity by dispersing the funds to that specific charity for the campaign.
That's great. Matt, what value do technology-powered DAFs bring to the broader nonprofit ecosystem?
Well, I think they bring a lot. And I gave you two, for instance, examples of how these technologies work. There are others out there that do similar kinds of things. There's organizations that support, giving just through their own website, looking like more of a retail model where they put a website out and they allow funds to go to charities. There's organizations that support what I'll call retail point of sale, either a website or actually a point of sale in a store. If you go to the grocery store and they say, do you want to top off $1 for, this XYZ charity? That's always run through a technology platform. And so there's a whole host of ways in which people are raising money. Disaster recovery is a big one where people can put out large campaigns to raise lots of money for instance, the wildfires in LA recently. And all of it comes down to ease of giving, I think, is the main benefit and value for it. It's very simple for any of these platforms to be used. It usually just takes a credit card or some sort of digital wallet to do the funding. And then the rest of it is all handled by the technology platform. They've done the vetting of the charities. They know how to get the funds to the charities, either electronically or through a paper check. It can be done within days if it's set up that way. So it goes fast and it's simple for the donor to use. And many of them do it on mobile platforms. So the ease of use, I think, is a very good purpose. And the second one is it's a very high amplification model. So, I talked about disaster recovery. Organizations that have set up these disaster recovery platforms can raise millions of dollars in a couple of days because these platforms are available for them to use.
That's terrific. On the nonprofit coach, of course, we always try to bring in the most practical applications. What do nonprofits need to know about this technology and about donor advised funds?
Well, a lot of times they don't need to know a lot. They can be a receiver of these funds if they're not even registered with these charities, because like the Blackbaud Giving Fund, we send them out to any charity that's in good standing with the IRS. So if we don't have their electronic funds transfer information, we'll send them a check. But a lot of the platforms encourage these charities to register with their platform. And what that does is it makes a tighter connection between the charity and the platform. And registering with them can also allow them to move money electronically, which I think is a big part of the speed and the taking the sand out of the gears of the whole giving process. That's the upside. The downside is that there's beginning to be more and more and more of these platforms. And if a charity has to register with each and every one, it sometimes can get down to be a question of do they have the time and energy and resources to keep up with all these platforms that seem to be populating out there and growing without stop.
And that can take a lot of time. Of course, with every innovation comes a few growing pains. While tech-powered DAFs offer huge advantages that we've just discussed, they're not without challenges. What are some of the downsides that nonprofits are facing? You just mentioned one in terms of, registering and so many different platforms. But when they're engaging with these platforms, again, what do nonprofits need to know, or how can they make this work for them?
Yeah. I think the biggest one that comes to my mind is we are an intermediary, right? There's somebody now in between the donor and the nonprofit. And what that requires then is for some, I'll call it interpretation that has to happen on the nonprofit side in terms of receiving the funds. In your introduction, you said I spend time working with nonprofits. I spend a lot of time working with nonprofits, helping them understand how to get the funds from us in an easier fashion. And, because we are an intermediary. So if the money comes in, the nonprofit's going to want to know who gave that money, who's behind the funds, the original donor. And we are all about trying to make sure that's as transparent as possible. But sometimes it's not as transparent. The funds come in, they're in a check form. There might be not a lot of data behind it. There's some platform that the nonprofit needs to go to find it. And once they do, then they have to figure out, well, how do I get now this data into my tool, my CRM tool to manage and steward these donors. And those all take steps and takes learning, and some are more complicated than others, and others are very smooth and work very well. So that the whole intermediary thing, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Matt, what do you think the biggest misconception about donor advised funds are?
I think it's kind of what I just said. It's we create an intermediary, and to them sometimes it's not visible, right? If Ted gave $100 to a charity, how do I know that it was Ted? And if they don't understand it well enough, it can be complicated for them to see it. Either just through the simple, I don't know how to get to the platform with the report that has it, or it could be that I'm gathering the data in a wrong way, where I captured the money from what Ted's donor advised fund sponsor was and not Ted Hart. And so now I've lost the name of the individual I'm trying to create a relationship with. So I think there's where the complication comes in, and the misperception can be, well, wait a minute, it's all anonymous.
Right.
And that's not true. It's greater than 90% of donor advised funds give their name, their contact information, along with the donation. The key is, does the charity receive it in a way that they can understand that that's what's happening?
Right. So a good rule of thumb based on what you just said is if it came in looking anonymous, don't assume that it is.
I would say that for sure. I mean, yes, every now and then it will be, but if it's not clear to you, ask some questions. See if you can look at your data a little bit more carefully. How did your system record the donation? The whole hard credit, soft credit thing that happens at nonprofits. You got to make sure that the soft credit is understood to be the donor behind the money. The hard credit is the donor advised fund sponsor, because that's who you officially got the funds from. But knowing who's behind it is always key, because they're the ones that are giving. They're giving it to you intentionally. there's a lot of positive momentum going on there. So reaching out to those people and thanking them and beginning the stewardship process is absolutely critical.
And for most of those donors, they are expecting that the charity does know that they gave.
Absolutely. Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, they went through the effort of being intentional about giving to them. They would like that nonprofit to know that they were the ones that gave it. There are some instances where that doesn't happen, where somebody wants to give anonymously because they may not want, the public to know that they're supporting that particular charity. But for the most part, people are anxious to support causes that are important to them and anxious to have those nonprofits know that they think highly of them and they're supporting them and they like the work they're doing.
yeah, research shows that anonymous giving is only about 4 or 5% of DAF gifts. So if you're a nonprofit executive listening to this podcast and you're experiencing a much higher rate of anonymous giving from donor advised funds, take a look at how you're getting that data, where it's coming in. And depending on the size of the charity, Matt, it might be that, all the checks or the financial information went to the finance department, and the development team or the relationship managers are just not getting any of the information about the gift.
I've seen that happen personally. I've been to the Association of Fundraising Professionals conference and sitting at lunch, and we pulled out a laptop and showed them the report, and their eyes popped out of their head and going, well, who in our organization's receiving this? And somebody said, well, that's so-and-so from finance. And they all said, well, we should be on this list. We should have access to this information. So it does happen.
Exactly.
I've seen it with my own eyes.
Well, really good, very practical advice. We're going to take a very quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to share some inside information about a very wonderful sit-down session that I had with Matt Nash for the DAF Revolution, making a difference in our modern world. And we'll be right back.
If you're enjoying this conversation and want to learn more, the DAF Revolution is your practical guide to turning donor-advised funds into real impact. Packed with insights from over 120 experts, including today's guest, it covers philanthropy, finance, law, nonprofits, and technology. Get the DAF Revolution now on Amazon or wherever you buy your favorite books.
And we're back. Matt, as I mentioned just before we took the break, you and I had an opportunity to sit down and have a really in-depth conversation. I was honored to include some of your thoughts in the DAF Revolution, making a difference in our modern world. And you actually sort of previewed this a few moments ago, but you said in the book, DAFs have taken a lot of the sand out of the gears of giving. They've made it very simple for donors to give. Can you help our listeners understand why this simplicity matters and how it benefits both donors and nonprofits?
Sure. Well, just think about what happens when you give to a DAF, right? You have some sort of account that's open to receive funds that the sole intention of it is to give to a charity. And the donor then can fund that and doesn't have to make the decision immediately about where those funds go. I always think about it as that there's two decisions often to make in this. There's the head decision about, okay, I have some money that has come to me in whatever shape or form. How much of that do I want to give to charity and put aside? There's usually some financial discussion in your head that goes on there in terms of how much discretionary income do I need, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the heart one, which is like, well, what's really important to me? And how do I want to support those charities? And when is it important for me to support those charities? And so I think just having an account where you just can set money for the sole purpose of giving is the beginning of the process of taking the sand out of the gears. Because now you get it in there and now you can make decisions throughout the rest of the year or even in the coming years about what's important to you and when are even opportunistic times when it's important to help a nonprofit, particularly in these times. In the last year or so, it's been increasingly difficult for nonprofits to get the funds that they need at the time that they need that. And then once you make the decision, all you do is you pull out your phone, you go onto your account, you hit the button, tell them how much you want to go or what you want to go, and the rest just happens. And, a week later, you get an email or a letter from the nonprofit thanking them for the money. And, it's a very simple process. There's no check writing. There's no, trying to keep track of all the records that you've got because everything you've done is in a nice report. Year end, you know exactly who you gave to, how much money you gave. It's a very simple process.
I suppose for the nonprofit organization, the very good news is the donor's already given. You don't have to convince them to give. All you have to do is make the case that they should give to you.
Exactly, which is really all the more reason why the whole stewardship process is important, because they want to support you. They want to know more about what you're doing and the kind of, impact that you're having. And the more you help them see that, the more money you're going to get. Because the other good news is that there's usually more money behind what they already gave you.
That's right. Because again, they're already primed to give because they've opened the donor advised fund. And typically people do that and give again. So there's more money in the fund and there'll probably be more money in the future. So building that strong relationship really matters.
Sure does.
Matt, also in the DAF Revolution, you also shared a wish with us that I know many others in the charitable sector share. You said, I wish that the qualified retirement distribution could go into a DAF. It's a good way to hopefully use it. For those who aren't familiar with QCDs, can you walk us through what they are and why you think the rules should change to allow them to be directed into DAFs?
Sure. Well, in a simple words, we have a minimum required distribution one must take when you hit a certain age. I think it's 72. It might be a little bit different now because it moves each year. And now those funds that you have to take are taxable. And so you may not be in a situation where you actually need those funds at this point in time. And the qualified retirement deduction is meant to, instead of taking those funds in yourself, you move them to a charity. And if you do, then it's a tax deductible activity for you. So it's a great way for people who are already retired and are, have enough funds to live on, to support charities, because they may not need the money at that point. And so it's an opportunity for them to give and support something that's been important to them often for a long period in their lives. And it's very simple. The wish I have is that it would also be available to give to a donor advised fund, because as of now, it's not. And that makes you give directly to a charity. So if you're a big donor advised fund user, now you have to split your efforts between putting the money into the fund and using the fund to support your charities with handling this retirement money in a different manner. It just adds a little bit more complexity.
Just like one of the benefits of a donor advised fund is at the time of the distribution, they might not be ready to make that decision.
That's correct.
It might not be good timing for them. And so if they could put it into a donor advised fund, they could have the luxury of time and thought to be planful in their giving.
Right. Yeah, it's in an ironic way, they're getting the money whether they want it or not.
Right.
And so if they weren't ready for it, it's a race to make the decision about how they're going to do it, or they end up having to pay the taxes on the money coming in.
Right. And through a quirk of the regulations, that cannot go into a DAF right now, but there have been attempts or at least discussions of maybe changing that regulation. And hopefully at some point that will. A lot of folks join you in that wish. Before we wrap up today, Matt, I want to go back to something that you had said a little bit earlier. And you had also discussed this when we had our sit down together, but I wanted to just dig into it a little bit deeper. You said DAF is really a two-step decision. As you mentioned earlier, there's the head decision about getting the tax deduction, and then there's the heart decision about what causes really are important to you and that you want to give to. That seems to perfectly capture the dual nature of how donors think. So can you help us, before we leave today, unpack that a little bit more for our listeners and help us understand how nonprofits can better speak to both the head and the heart in this process, and why donor advised funds maybe help them do that?
Yeah, okay, good question. So the way I think about it is that, as you're just living your life and you're doing your financial planning, you tend to spend time thinking about different components of it at different times, right? So I think most people think about the whole tax situation as you're kind of leading into the fall and saying, okay, what's my situation? You might be meeting with your financial advisor if you have one, or doing your research on your own if you don't. And your mind is thinking about the money. It's not thinking so much about the use of the money. You're more thinking about how much do I need? How much do I want to put in different buckets? And that sort of financial planning process in my mind is the head part, right? It's more logic. It's more thinking about, fundamental needs you might have, or fundamental things that you're trying to invest in and or spend money on, that you got to put a new roof on your house or whatever it is that's coming up this year. Those are all ahead decisions, of which the charitable piece is a component of it, right? Say, well, let's put away X number of dollars for charitable giving this year. And then it's in, as you know, it's an irrevocable gift. It's going to, when it goes to a donor advised fund, it's literally going to a charity. They're 501c3 charities. And you get the notification of receipt of a deduction if that's available to you. But then there's another period of time. Often this is what I see, and it's people, it starts in the Thanksgiving time frame. In fact, a lot of families will sit down during Thanksgiving weekend and start thinking about, well, how do we want to support our charities this year? And you begin going through the list of who you've given to in the past and who are organizations out there in need that you are interested in now. And you begin to say, well, okay, how do we want to allocate funds against it? And if you've already done the head part, you already know how many funds you have
Right.
to allocate against it. And so it becomes a more thoughtful way of saying, how do we want to give back this year? What's important to us? Who's really in need of the funds now, and who's been helping us understand what kind of impact they're having that aligns with our thinking. And I think it's a great way to do this whole process.
Well, in that scenario that you've put out, of course, you've now made it possible for others to be involved with that discussion, right? So that it can be a family discussion. The children, grandchildren could be involved
Right.
in that discussion, because you've made the head decision. And now the heart decision can be one that you make, or make with your spouse or significant other. So there's a process there. And you pegged it, Thanksgiving sort of end of year, which seems to suggest that, the Giving Tuesday period is well-timed and natural for a lot of folks. So
Right.
what is that practical advice for what nonprofits should do? And at the same time, could you give us a little bit of insight for advisors and their clients and how they can make all this work?
Yeah, well, let's start with the nonprofits. I think the key in the nonprofits is to recognize when somebody is using a donor advised fund to support you. Because when that happens, there's ways that you should be able to recognize them and help them understand that how they're giving to you, right? So don't invite them to a gala and ask them to use their donor advised fund to sponsor the gala, right? Because that's not a use that you can use for a donor advised fund.
Not allowed, right?
To me, that's step one, is to have the nonprofits recognize who these donors are and the fact that they might be giving in a different way than they've given before. On the advisor side, it's, I think, helping somebody see that there's a way that they can put money aside for charity that is easy to set up, and it becomes an important thing to think about when they're coming into some money, whether that's, a bonus that they get at the end of the year, or maybe they might be, getting some stock funds that are coming in through either their workplace or some investments that they've had for a long time, and they're looking to take some of the gains off the table. And so those things are the kinds of conversations that are normal for an investment advisor to work with their clients on. Sometimes they don't get comfortable thinking about helping them think about where to use it.
Mm.
So taking them up to the point of saying, hey, there's this thing called a donor advised fund. You can move the money over there, and then you can decide where to give it later. It sort of takes the investment advisor off the hook a little bit of getting into the real personal side of what's happening with that customer. But at the same time, it gives them a tool that they can use, and can be a very valuable tool. So I think that ends up being a win-win conversation between the client and the investment advisor.
Matt, really terrific advice for donors, for advisors, and for nonprofits. So I want to thank you for sharing so many important insights today. Your work at Blackbaud Giving Fund is helping shape the future of donor engagement, and I know my listeners will take away a lot of what you've shared today. To our audience, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you get your own copy of the DAF Revolution, Making a Difference in Our Modern World, available now on Amazon and other major retailers. Basically, any place that you get your favorite books, you can get the DAF Revolution. So Matt, thank you again for being my guest here today.
It's my pleasure. Good seeing you again. Thank you, Ted.
You've been listening to The Nonprofit Coach and Everything DAF with Ted Hart. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you enjoy your favorite shows. And don't forget to pick up Ted's newest book, The DAF Revolution, available now on Amazon and at booksellers everywhere. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Nonprofit Coach.